is celebrating 70 years of service, the Platinum Jubilee, Lewis. Is it just really inappropriate for Australia to be doing this at a very special time for our Queen?
Oh, look, I mean, it's great for the British monarch, but I suppose that's the thing is, you say our Queen, but she's not really our Queen. I mean, she's only our head of state. Well, she's only our head of state because we were once a British colony, and that is, by and large, I think the core argument is that we're not a British colony anymore. We're an independent country, and we should have our own head of state. We're far more mature, and we're capable of choosing a New Zealander. We're capable of having a Governor-General who's basically our head of state now. We could have a New Zealander as a head of state who would be a citizen of this country, and that would be someone who could represent us to the world, and we could stay a member of the Commonwealth, so we'd have best of both worlds.
Okay, let's bring in our panel. Raven Can, Republican or monarchist?
Oh, well, I don't think anyone who thinks about it could possibly be a monarchist. It just makes no sense at all to let one rich family who've had stuff keep having it. And, it is that thing where there's, quite apart from the fact that she's not our Queen in the sense that if there's a match at Twickenham between England and the All Blacks, who is she really supporting? But as long as we have that royal family, we do tend to, on our news, for example, see things through a slightly British romantic filter. And I think that actually is harmful to to representation of our own views, our own accent, our own the place we live in. So but I get that we don't necessarily want to upset her personally at this age and sort of fire her, but she's probably not paying that much attention to Australian news, much less to developments here constitutionally.
Lewis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Raven made excellent points. One of the arguments for change is that this is really about how we see ourselves in the world. And to go back to what I was saying earlier, if we're continuing to see ourselves as just a former or a post-British colony, we're really selling ourselves short. We're a part of an international community. We shouldn't see ourselves as simply a piece of the former British Empire.
Georgie, let's so
much more than that.
Before the Pips, Georgie, where do you stand?
I agree. Look, I was born and raised in the UK, so I am somewhat brainwashed and indoctrinated, but I definitely would not describe myself as a monarchist. But you raised a point just before around, kind of if Australia goes down this route, what's it actually going to mean for our own discussions? And I'm interested for you just to give me your thoughts on that aspect. Is that going to make us go, oh, bloody Australia beat us? Okay, shelve it. Or is it going to make us go, right, get the cabinet paper up?
Oh, look, absolutely. I hope we get the cabinet paper up. The funny thing is, constitutionally, it's actually much easier for us to do this than it is for the Australians. For the Australians to do it, they need to have a referendum that's passed not by a majority, just by a majority of people, but also by a majority of states. In New Zealand, because we don't have a written constitution that's all in one place, it would actually be quite straightforward, and Parliament could actually just pass a simple act in Parliament to make the change.
Lewis, Holden, kia ora there. I'll let our wonderful panellists, Geordie Stiliano and Raven Can, go for a nice wander down Cuba Street this evening.
On the bike?
Yeah, on the bike all night. Thank you both. I'm Wallace Chapman. 3:45 tomorrow. Checkpoint next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo rangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. A millimetre's the difference between mayhem and murder as Auckland flatmates narrowly escape being gunned down in a drive-by shooting. Fed up bus drivers are lured away by big dollar jobs and better conditions, some offshore. We're joined by the Transport Minister who's promising big changes within the next 2 months. New Zealand Rugby finally converts its $200 million Silver Lake deal from pipe dream to reality. We check out what's in it for grassroots rugby. Should the country's name officially be Aotearoa? A popular Christchurch dog park reopens after a poisoning scare. And let's get the party started. The 4-day knees up for the Queen. Check us out live, Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. An Auckland construction worker is lucky to be alive after bullets whizzed over his head during a shooting in Manukau last night. It's the latest in a spate of recent shootings in Tamaki Makaurau, including several linked to tensions between rival gangs. Abhinesh Kumar was sitting eating dinner when an unknown gunman opened fire on his bedroom.
I was lucky sitting down and eating the food once the gun shoot happened. I was sitting down because my phone was charging in the charger port. So I was sitting down and eating the food in the floor.
Police are yet to respond to questions about the shooting, including whether it's a case of mistaken identity. You can hear more on this story in Checkpoint shortly. The New Zealand rugby boss says the country's provincial unions wanted clarity on several key areas before signing off on the Silver Lake deal. Those questions from the 26 unions were the last sticking point in the $200 million deal, which has been finally signed off. Mark Robinson says there was a range of things various unions wanted to shore up before agreeing.
They wanted to look at aspects of the funding model that we were putting up and have more certainty around what that looked like. They wanted us to think about the governance provisions, across New Zealand Rugby and the new commercial code. And they wanted to have clarity around the legacy fund and the fact that there was strong degrees of protection that money could only in the future go into the community game.
The deal will see Silver Lake invest $200 million in a new commercial entity that will control all revenue-generating assets of New Zealand Rugby. A petition calling for New Zealand's name to be officially changed to Aotearoa has been delivered to Parliament. Te Pāti Māori launched the petition, which also calls for all Te Reo Māori place names to be restored. Co-leader Rawiri Waititi says he's proud 70,000 people signed it.
It goes to show there is a growing interest in moving Aotearoa into a more Tiriti-centric space, but also to realign Aotearoa back into one Anuiaki. We're really proud of the efforts and the time people took out to sign that petition.
Rawiri Waititi says the petition isn't about changing who New Zealanders are, but instead strengthening the country's identity. The first piece of legislation setting out the three waters reforms has been introduced to Parliament. With local body elections coming in October, the contentious reorganisation of drinking waste and stormwater can be expected to attract a lot of debate. The local government minister, Nanaya Mahuta, says without the bill, water infrastructure around the country will continue deteriorating. But National's Simon Watts says it will unleash hell on local government, and his party will repeal the law if elected next year. Bus drivers in Auckland say they're working 13-hour days and encountering more grumpy and aggressive passengers amid a shortage of about 270 drivers. Due to high rates of staff sickness and ongoing recruitment problems, Auckland Transport is cancelling about 1,400 services each day. It's working with the government, Auckland Council and Waka Kotahi to lift drivers' pay rates. Drivers also want limits on split shifts and overtime. This driver told RNZ the working conditions are terrible.
When bus trips are missed, the passengers who have missed that bus because the trips are not done, they get upset with the next driver that comes along. So the next driver has to bear the full blunt of all, the frustration of the passengers. Now, if the companies and AT pay a better rate, drivers would not leave so quickly.
Bus drivers say colleagues are leaving to work for Uber or for truck companies. Dunedin Hospital will be closed to all visitors from 6 o'clock tonight. The Southern DHB says due to the increased risk of COVID infection and pressure on hospital capacity, visiting restrictions are being tightened to protect vulnerable patients. Visiting is still allowed on compassionate grounds. As of Tuesday, 24 patients were in Dunedin Hospital with COVID. To sport, and former Black Caps skipper Brendan McCullum is anticipating a surreal experience when he lines up against New Zealand in the first test at Lord's. McCullum played over 440 games for New Zealand in an international career spanning 14 years and makes his debut as England coach tonight.
There's going to be a raft of emotions there, no doubt. I wish the New Zealand boys well, a lot of friends in that team. I hope they play well. I hope we can beat them.
Lydia Ko believes playing for the biggest purse in women's golf won't affect the way players approach their game. This week's US Open in North Carolina has a total prize purse of $15 million, with the winner pocketing $2.8 million.
I don't think anyone's going to have a putt on the 72nd hole to possibly win and go, oh my goodness, if I miss this putt, it's like something $1,000. I think it's going to be like, oh my goodness, I have this putt to win the US Women's Open.
Basketballer Steven Adams has won the NBA Fan Favourites Award for Assist of the Year. The Memphis Grizzlies forward was recognised for his length of the court pass and a buzzer-beater score against the San Antonio Spurs in March.
Adams going long, Morant! He hit it! John Morant, insanity! You gotta be kidding me.
And Ukraine have kept alive their dream of reaching the Football World Cup. A 3-1 win over Scotland has set them up for a playoff match against Wales on Monday, with the winner booking a spot in Qatar. That's the news.
Jurors find in favour of Johnny Depp.
By clear and convincing evidence that Ms. Heard acted with actual malice.
Reaction from the world.
I can say that I am very shocked and surprised by the nature of this, by the fact that the jury concluded after hearing this that she would be liable.
Everyone is looking at this to see if this represents a kind of vindication, a kind of career rebirth, or a cleansing of Johnny Depp's name.
Hearing all voices, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For all of the North Island, except Gisborne to Wairarapa. Showers with squally thunderstorms and hail easing tomorrow afternoon. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers clearing late evening but developing again tomorrow morning with some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms from the afternoon. For Wairarapa, scattered showers, some heavy with thunderstorms on the ranges. Showers are easing and becoming confined to the coast tomorrow afternoon. For Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy rain, possibly with thunderstorms and hail, easing tomorrow morning. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloudy periods. Showers south of Dunedin, spreading everywhere this afternoon with some heavy falls. Tomorrow morning, showers easing and becoming confined to the coast. And for the Chatham Islands, fine spells. Rains developing late evening, becoming heavy and thundery overnight, and then easing tomorrow afternoon. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll update you with the latest news headlines and traffic at about 5:20.
Ngā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A group of Auckland flatmates are lucky to be alive tonight after a gunman opened fire on their home as they ate dinner. One of the men has described his seconds of terror as bullets whizzed over his head while he sat on his bedroom floor tucking into a meal. Nick Trubridge has the story.
Abhinesh Kumar's dinner last night could have been his last meal. The window of his room in his Manukau flat is littered with several bullet holes.
7 o'clock, we were sitting inside the room. I was sitting inside the room having my dinner. And suddenly the bullet shot came like seconds.
In the early evening last night, a gunman pulled up outside the Albert Road flat and unleashed. 5 bullets penetrated the glass and whizzed over Mr. Kumar's head. Luck, and luck alone, appears to have saved him. Had he been standing, he could be dead.
I was sitting in my room, but my phone was charging, so I was eating the dinner and sitting down there. Lucky I didn't stand up, otherwise the bullet was going straight later. So once I just stand up, then he told me that there had a gunshot here. So every neighbor's coming out. So I told him to go out, just go out. So by the time we came out, everything was gone.
While Mr. Kumar was saved by his cell phone, choosing to sit next to it while it charged, his other flatmates were calling out to take cover as the bullets breached windows and walls.
The other guy in the other room, he started to shouting, yeah, there's gunshot happening. Then I just left the food, just stand up. By the time the gun was already shot.
So if you were standing up in there, you would have been shot?
Yeah. I was lucky sitting down and eating the food.
That flatmate, the man shouting to take cover, appears to have been injured by bullet fragments.
The other guy was shot with he was scratching his stomach down here somewhere. Gun maybe this cross. He was sitting in the other room.
Mr. Kumar's flatmate has 3 wounds around his left hip, where a gnarly purple and blue bruise is developing. He speaks little English, but a third flatmate tells me his injured friend rushed to alert him after realising those loud bangs were in fact gunshots directed at their flat.
I was sleeping. I don't know anything. But this one wake me up. I was asleep. When he heard the sound of the bullet, and he wake me up.
Meanwhile, Mr Kumar says he's not associated with gangs. In fact, he works in construction. His flatmates have similar jobs. As we stand and chat, several plainclothes officers comb the flat's front lawn. Armed police stand out front guarding the scene. Mr Kumar appears shaken as he watches it all unfold.
Are you? Scary, man. Yeah. Good at the moment, but could kill someone.
Like someone could have been killed.
Yeah. Lucky we were all like down. Otherwise, normally that time I walk in my room, but lucky I was sitting down that time. That was lucky.
A group of flatmates eating dinner, relaxing after a hard day at work. The latest crop of innocent Aucklanders caught between the crossfire of yet more gun violence on Tamaki Makoto's streets. 10 minutes after the Albert Road incident, police were called to another shooting in Opuheke. Checkpoints yet to receive a response to several questions put to the police, including whether the Albert Road shootings linked with several recent drive-by attacks associated with tensions between the Killabees and the tribesmen gangs. In the meantime, more innocent bystanders are left counting their lucky stars.
And Nick Trubridge joins us now from the Auckland newsroom. Nick, have you had an update from the police about this?
Hi Lisa, we certainly have. We've just received a statement from Jill Rogers. Of course, she is the area commander for the county's Manukau district of the police. She basically says, and it's very strongly worded, that it's extremely lucky police aren't dealing with a homicide inquiry tonight after that incident last night. Of course, we had the gentleman mentioned in that report who was, frankly, very close to being shot, only for the fact that he was sitting down in his room on his cell phone. We also had his flatmate, who police say did spend some time in Middlemore Hospital last night as a result of the injuries he received from what appear to be some sort of shrapnel, maybe bullet fragments. But what I can also tell you is that these two incidents, there are actually more. There were 5 altogether. There were 3 more. There was another shooting last night in Takanini, and there are also 2 fires that police investigated last night. One of those was in Onehunga and one was in Pakuranga. These are all connected. All 5 incident police say are connected to a recent spate of gang violence, of course, boiling tensions between the tribesmen and their former feeder gang, the Killabees. And what can we expect? Well, police say expect to see a lot more presence, a lot more people in blue on the streets around Tamaki Makoto, around counties Manukau in particular. And I would just also add that we've investigated or looked into a lot of these shooting incidents in recent weeks. This is certainly, when you look at it, the closest someone has come to being actually hurt or worse still killed. It really was centimetres in this, and of course one of his flatmates was injured in the process. So that's what the police are saying. Expect to see more of them out and about. They say they will stamp down very hard on this when they find the people responsible.
Thanks, Nick. Nick Trubridge joining us live from our Auckland newsroom. It is 13 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. New Zealand Rugby has finally got the deal it wanted. The final hurdle allowing NZR to sign a $200 million deal with US private equity firm Silver Lake has been cleared. Chairman Stuart Mitchell has described it as a transformational moment for the game in this country. This afternoon, the 26 provincial unions and the Māori Rugby Board voted in favour of the deal, the last piece in the jigsaw. The proposal was approved with 89 votes for and just 1 against. The vote was by a secret ballot at the request of 2 of the unions. New Zealand rugby boss Mark Robinson says getting the Silver Lake deal over the line is something to be celebrated, but he concedes there's still plenty of work to be done to make the most of the investment.
There's a lot of hard work still in front of us. This is not, the final part. Well, this is only the beginning, and now we commence work internally and with Silver Lake as partners to be able to really fulfil all the opportunities we believe sit in front of us.
Robinson believes the money will help grow the game at grassroots level and help fight declining player numbers at school, college and club rugby. The Silver Lake saga has dragged on for more than 18 months before today's vote. Now reporter Joe Porter joins us now. Joe, so NZR got what it wanted. Did the provincial unions get what they wanted?
Well, not exactly. They wanted a representative on the Commercial Code board that's going to be set up by New Zealand Rugby and Silver Lake, just like the Players Association are going to have. They don't have that specifically, but they will have a provincial union representative and one New Zealand Māori Rugby Board representative. They'll be included in the committee that chooses which of the NZR directors will go onto the Commercial Code board. So they don't get a voice around that table independently, but they get to choose which of New Zealand Rugby's voices do go to that board. So it's not quite the same.
They're one step back from the action, kind of.
Absolutely, one step back. And they also wanted the cap on any future or funding they would get from any future revenue removed. So let's say, for example, they would get 17.5% of any future potential revenue earned by Commercial Co. If that was capped, then once they reached a turnover of, say, 260 million, that would be the end of any future funding or more funding for the provinces. So they would reach a cap level. It's interesting to note there is no cap on how much the players will get paid should the revenue increase. So that's another one where you
They get their percentage. The players get their percentage no matter how big the pool of profit becomes.
Correct, whereas the unions only get their percentage up to a certain point of where the revenue gets to. So there's no ceiling for the players, but there is for the provincial unions. So not quite the same as what they would have liked. But they're happy with the deal, obviously. They need the cash desperately, and they're going to get some. In fact, they're going to get a fair whack of it. So relatively happy, the provincial unions.
Yeah, so where does the $37 million for short-term investment go? Who gets that?
Yeah, well, $14 million goes to the top-tier NPC provincial unions, so your Premiership and Championship teams, your Aucklands, your Manawatu's, for example. The Heartland unions, your South Canterbury, your West Coast Buller, they get $6 million, $2 million to the Māori Rugby Board, $1.25 million to Super Rugby clubs, $7.5 million to community clubs, $5 million to the players, and $0.6 million to NZR associates and $0.26 million to referees. So it does get spread out amongst these unions quite well. They should get the cash before the end of the year. NZR is getting the money in July, so that should be distributed soon after. It will be $14 million to the top unions, a large cash investment.
And what about women's rugby?
Yeah, nothing directly or specifically in this breakdown given to women's rugby. It will be up to the unions and the Super Rugby clubs to make sure that some of the money they're given, multi-million dollars of course, goes towards growing the women's game and increasing the eyes on the women's game. We had a shortened, truncated version of Super Rugby Opiki this year. You'd hope that with this given funding, they should have a full competition next year.
And the Legacy Fund, right? So there was much discussion about this, and the deals had a few different versions, right? So it started off smaller, the Legacy Fund. Yep. What is the value of what's been set up, and do we know how it's going to work?
Well, it's $60 million at this point in time that they'll put straight away from the initial $200 million investment into the Legacy Fund. And that Legacy Fund is essentially set up to protect the future of the community game. What they'll do is NZR hope to grow that fund to about $100 million, and then each year the interest they earn off that $100 million will be given out to various people, unions if they need it, community clubs if they need it, and also, say for example, a club had a club rooms in a state of disrepair, they could apply to New Zealand Rugby to gain access to some of that money that comes with that funding to do those things.
And well, the way this was sold is that there's a declining participation in rugby, and that this is going to turn that round. Yeah. Is it going to? Yeah, well, that's the $200 million question, isn't it? You know, I mean, that was one of the big concerns of the provincial unions looking at the deal that was tabled by NZR and the Players Association. They wanted to have clarity around the Legacy Fund and the fact that there were strong degrees of protection that the money would go into the community game. So they seem to have been assured along those lines, but will it actually happen? I mean, it's yet to be seen, isn't it? The funding that New Zealand Rugby will give to the provincial unions, some of it is just going to be given straight to them. They're basic level funding, so they can do with that what they want. A lot of it, though, will be tagged, so they will have to prove to New Zealand Rugby that they are using that money to grow the women's game, to grow participation numbers at club or school level, and have to have the structures in place to do so. So it's not just a free-for-all. They're going to have to prove where that money's going. Thanks, Joe. I'm sure we'll be talking to you about this again. That is our rugby reporter, Joe Porter. Te Pāti Māori has handed over its petition calling for the country to officially be named Aotearoa. It collected 70,000 signatures backing the change, but the government says any discussions should involve the wider population. Political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
It's on our passports, it's on our money, it's in our national anthem, but it's not our official name yet. A petition with just over 70,000 signatures was delivered to Parliament this afternoon, calling to change the country's official name to Aotearoa and restore Te Reo Māori names for all towns, cities and place names.
Whether you're for or against, the thing is everybody knows that Aotearoa is a legitimate name given to this country by kupe, not by Governor Gray or any written book. This is well before any of those things.
Te reo fluency amongst Māori dropped from 90% in 1910 to 26% in 1950. Today, just 20% of the Māori population speak it, 3% of the whole country. Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rauwiri Waititi says the only way to get that back up is to make the language visible in as many places as possible.
This is the pebble being dropped in the water, right? The initial pebble hitting the water. And what it will do from now, for many years to come, is those ripples will continue to get bigger and bigger.
The petition now goes to a select committee which will decide what to do next. Whether that's a bill or even a public referendum, Rauwiri Waititi says it's already succeeded.
It's starting the dialogue, it's building awareness, but it has started a wānanga across the country.
National leader Christopher Luxon says changing the name is a constitutional issue.
I think those are decisions for the New Zealand people, and if there's widespread support for it, it should go to referendum and it should be a decision that they get to make. It's not something the government makes.
Christopher Luxon just experienced firsthand what a long way we have to go. Last week he posted a tribute in Te Reo to Kaumatua Joe Hawke and attracted a tirade of anti-Māori remarks from national supporters. Rauwiri Waititi is brushing off any backlash the petition gets.
If they're getting the undies in a twist, that's their undies, not my undies.
Government ministers say it's time for a discussion but aren't actually committing to one.
I think we should have a good conversation about it.
We have other kaupapa more important right now.
These things evolve over time, but it's up to every New Zealander to be part of the debate.
I think any question like that needs to be worked through really carefully.
It's not something the Labour Party caucus has discussed. I'm encouraging one and all to have a very mature debate about what I think is a pretty cool kaupapa.
Artist Hohepa Thompson, also known as Hori, backs the petition. Hori's pledge is a response to billboards popping up around the country saying New Zealand, not Aotearoa, funded by lobby group Hobson's Pledge. He's been driving across to Ike a Maui, his own billboard in tow, to call for change.
Māori have taken the back seat for many, many times. So when it comes to Aotearoa, New Zealand, I think it's time just to, let's have this. Aotearoa, boom.
Hohepa Thompson says we've been here before, and pretty recently. 3 years ago, some said a national holiday for Matariki would never happen. Later this month, it'll be officially celebrated for the first time.
It is 22 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And we would love your feedback. Homai o whakaaro. Let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Silver Lake deal, $200 million deal, ticked off by New Zealand Rugby. Also, Auckland, another 5 gang-related incidents, the police say, in the last, 24 hours, I think it is. Drive-by shootings and some innocent bystanders caught up in one of those, and arsons. Do you feel safe in the city? Let us know your thoughts. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint to RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to get to the headlines now. Ane, Evie, mina pitipiti kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. An Auckland construction worker is describing how bullets flew over his head when a gunman opened fire on his house in Manukau last night. Police say it's incredibly fortunate they're not dealing with a homicide. The head of New Zealand Rugby says he considered a range of requests from provincial unions before signing off on the Silver Lake deal. Mark Robinson says questions from the 26 unions were the last sticking point in the $200 million deal. The Timaru, Waimakariri and Whangarei district councils are heading to court to challenge the government's controversial 3 water reforms. A police program on bias in the force will now turn its attention to examining police decisions after issuing an update on its progress today. However, the research hasn't come to a conclusion about whether bias exists or whether specific actions to tackle it what they should be. Dunedin Hospital is closing its doors to visitors from tonight as it treats at least 24 patients with COVID-19. Te Pāti Māori co-leader Dawiri Waititi says he's proud of the 70,000 people who have signed a petition calling for New Zealand's name to be officially changed to Aotearoa. The petition was delivered to Parliament today. And warm seas and subtropic winds will keep the country warm throughout most of the winter, although Niwa says some cold spells are also likely. No kidding. Those are the headlines. Now let's take a look at the traffic. And in Auckland, a crash is blocking lanes on State Highway 20 prior to Queenstown Road. Expect long delays in both directions and pass with care because the weather, as we know, is rubbish today in Auckland. We'll update you with the latest news headlines and traffic at around 5:40.
Interested I am, Evie, on what people think about the call to officially change the name of the country to Aotearoa. Yeah, let's get some feedback, eh?
Yeah, I agree with keeping both.
All right, let's see what people think. Text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Aotearoa, New Zealand, or just stay where we're at. Let us know. Auckland bus drivers working 13-hour shifts to cover staff shortages say their employers need to take a hard look at the poor pay and terrible working conditions they're offering. They say colleagues are turning their skills to truck or Uber driving as a more lucrative alternative. Meanwhile, Wellington's Metlink says it's short 100 drivers too. Anei te kairi poata, Katie Todd.
The online job advertisements describe competitive remuneration, excellent working conditions and a flexible work-life balance. But bus drivers working for the 7 companies that make up Auckland Transport's workforce say that's not what they're experiencing.
The conditions are terrible at the moment. The pay is not at all adequate for the job that we have to do. There's no proper security for the drivers on the bus. They're being attacked, randomly all over the place.
Auckland Transport is an estimated 270 staff short, leading to about 1,400 services being cancelled each day. Part of it is staff sickness from COVID-19, but for a long time the company has also been struggling to recruit and retain staff. Drivers say their colleagues are increasingly turning to other forms of paid driving or heading overseas, largely because they're not paid enough.
It's not the greatest in terms of providing for your family and things like that. So it's not really helping out. We do need a pay rise.
Auckland Transport admits the starting wage of about $23.30 an hour isn't a good rate, and it's working with the government, Auckland Council and Waka Kotahi to lift that rate. But workers want their shifts reconsidered too. Traditionally, bus drivers have worked split shifts with a 4-hour break in the middle. With many in Auckland now living a long way from bus depots, drivers say it's just not feasible.
They come to work in the morning, say around 6 o'clock in the morning. Some of them come to work, some come at 5 o'clock. But even if they come at 6, then they get a little break in between 4 hours. But in 4 hours, they can't do anything. They can't go home because they stay too far away to travel back and forth. So they sit in the depot doing nothing, wasting their time, and then they go back to work till 7 o'clock or till 8 o'clock, and they go home. They have no family life at all.
Meanwhile, some drivers are working straight through that break, doing 13 or 14-hour days. As this driver explains, they're maxing out the legal number of hours they can work each week.
We can't work more because as per the NZTA, we just work like 70 hours a week.
Tramways Union National President Gary Froggatt describes that as a major concern. He says it's legal as long as the drivers get a 10-hour stand-down period between each long shift and a 24-hour break at the end of a 70-hour work week. But he says it's not helping with driver fatigue or to fill staff vacancies.
Unfortunately, some employers are falling back on the legislation and saying, well, we're allowed to roster you that and you sign up for that. And that doesn't attract drivers into the industry.
And it's not just Auckland. Bus companies describe driver shortages as nationally significant. Metlink in Wellington has about 500 bus drivers, but says it's about 100 drivers short of being able to operate a full timetable. In Canterbury, Metro is an estimated 40 drivers short, and it's cancelling roughly 23 services each day. Drivers and unions hope the budget's $61 million package for public transport will go straight into drivers' back pockets and help with recruitment. In the meantime, this driver says they're going to have to keep letting down their passengers.
It's our main goal is looking after them. all those ones who've got to go to and from work and their certain timings. So now it's just when they get there to go and catch a bus, it's cancelled.
They're asking passengers to be patient with them, saying they're doing their best.
And Transport Minister Michael Wood says current public transport tenders have contributed to a race to the bottom when it comes to bus drivers' wages, and he plans to make urgent changes.
We'll be working with bus operators, local government and unions to work out the best way that we can establish a baseline for fair pay and decent conditions for bus drivers across the country. One of the problems is that this has been one of the classic race to the bottom sectors where bus driver terms and conditions have been driven down by competitive tendering processes. We want to put a stop to that. Again, that's what fair pay agreements are about, and this is about the government putting money on the table to be able to support that process.
So you're basically referring there to the public transport operating model, right, which you have reviewed, and this is the document that governs how councils in Auckland Transport contract public transport services. So when you say that process has encouraged the race to the bottom in terms of wages, how so exactly?
The way in which the system currently works is that councils put out what are called public transport units for tender, and companies have to tender if they want to run their services there. And when you're running a bus company, the vast majority of the cost that you have is your labour costs with your drivers. And companies have tended to get those contracts based on the cheapest cost. And so one of the easiest ways that they've found to get contracts has been to lower their labour cost. And over a long period of time, that's led to an erosion of terms and conditions. And I'll just say, many of these companies, they want to do the right thing. They want to pay better terms and conditions to their drivers. But the whole system has been rigged against that. So that's why we are reforming the public transport operating model. It's why we're moving forward with fair pay agreements, which will also help to resolve this problem. But it's also why we need to invest, along with local government and along with the operators themselves, to make this a better and fairer profession for the people who drive our buses.
So are you going to bring in a minimum wage in essence? For example, say that anyone tendering must pay at least the living wage.
Well, in the first instance, I've asked Waka Kotahi to work with operators, local government and unions to try and establish a decent baseline across the sector, to actually get the parties to come together and on a voluntary basis agree to, as I say, a basic accord, a basic set of terms and conditions that can help us with this situation. And there have been good discussions there as well.
So voluntary minimum pay, Minister, is that what you're referring to?
That's right. Well, I want the parties to work together. Pay is not the only issue. There are also complex issues in this sector around split shifts, for example.
Yeah, and we'll get to that, Minister, but pay is really important because we're told it's ground grubber, right? So, and the suggestion is that some agencies are going to look to move up to $27 an hour, but I'm told that these drivers are being offered between $40 and $100 an hour to do other heavy machinery, heavy truck jobs. So why would they stay being a bus driver? How high does the minimum need to be in these contracts?
Well, that's what we need to work through as a part of this process. Some companies have already moved forward and increased their wages to around about the level that you've just cited. And they've reported to me that it has started to assist in terms of retaining people. But we'll need unions and companies to work together to work out what is sustainable. I'm clear that I want to make this a sustainable profession for the long run. If we want to reach our emissions reduction targets, we're going to need many more bus drivers because we're going to need much more public transport. Again, fair pay agreements are a part of that. Let's have a stable platform for this in the years to come, so that we can work through these issues and make it a sustainable profession.
So just so I'm clear on this, the $61 million announced in the budget to help train and retain drivers, is that money actually going to go into subsidising or bumping up their wages?
Yes, it is money which is with the government through the budget this year is directly putting into the system to support better pay and conditions for our bus drivers. And I've asked Waka Kotahi to work with the sector on what a basic industry accord looks like so that we can then support that. But there's also a role for local government and the operators themselves to come to the party there. But as government, that's our commitment tangibly through this budget to making a positive difference for our bus drivers.
Should school bus drivers be paid more? We've been contacted by someone who says they're getting around $21 an hour to drive a bus load of children around in peak traffic. That's a big responsibility, don't you reckon?
Look, it's a very important job. It's safety critical. It's critical to the functioning of our towns and cities and sometimes for our education system. People need to be paid fairly and treated fairly. As I was saying before, the fair pay is an important part of it.
So is $21 an hour fair? Because that's what the bottom line question is, isn't it, in that circumstance?
Yeah, well, the minimum wage is $21.20. That's the minimum anyone can be paid for work. That is a low wage for work of this kind. I would agree with that. And that's why we're putting our money on the table. We're investing. We're trying to change the system through fair pay agreements to give these people a much fairer go and ensure that we recruit and retain more of them. As I say, there's pay. The hours piece is important as well. If you go into this job, it's one thing to be paid well, but you also want hours of work and other conditions that support your family and community life. And that's complex stuff. It requires the parties to negotiate and work things out in good faith, and we're encouraging that process.
It seems like that you have been reviewing the public transport operating model since year dot. So how long is it going to take you to implement these changes and spend the money?
I expect us to make final decisions on an improved model for the tendering of public transport services within the next couple of months. I've had officials hard at work on that. I've been very engaged in talking with local government, and we'll be getting to final decisions there soon. But we're not waiting for that. As I say, we've made the decision to get this process underway, to invest money through the budget, to move forward with fair pay agreements because we know that we need to make progress on this issue. It's also, of course, been exacerbated recently by the COVID outbreak, which has put extra pressure onto the system.
But it's not the core issue because we've had shortages with bus drivers for 5 to 10 years, I'm told. So if it's 2 months to making a decision, how long before implementation?
Well, the public transport operating model, as I say, will be looking to make decisions within the next couple of months. That will be a slightly slower burn, but we've put money in the budget now. We're working with bus companies and unions now to try and negotiate an accord that will deliver better and fairer terms and conditions.
Are you going to outlaw split shifts in those transport contracts, public transport contracts?
I wouldn't see the government outlawing split shifts. There is a complexity here in which the peak of bus services tend to be firstly in the morning and then secondly later in the afternoon, and there is a challenge in terms of how bus companies manage that. But what I'm encouraging bus operators and unions to do is to sit down and negotiate a way of managing that in a way that's better and fairer than it has been in the past.
And that's the Transport Minister, Michael Wood. It is 36 minutes past 5. Kia mau tunu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time now for the business news. Ko taku hoa in Naianei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins us in the studio. OK, the cost of a 3-bedroom home, Nona, average cost, we should say, up nearly 21%. Oh, that's a bit stingy, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's all sorts of things that have added to these costs, like the cost of building a stairwell.
What?
Up 17% according to this. And this was data that was provided by Quotable Value. So they're the ones who value the homes, but also now they're valuing the components in these homes. So what does a wall cost? What does a stairwell cost? What does a balustrade cost? All these costs add up. And they add up quite a lot. So, yeah, 21% more. Now, you might think, well, if you're not building a new home, why would this matter to you? Well, if you're a homeowner and there's some damage, say a tree falls on your roof or
insurance
a car runs into the side of your building or what have you, your insurance needs to be able to cover those costs of windows and doors and exterior finishes and what have you. And so you better check your insurance policy to make sure it's keeping up with the rate of inflation in terms of building costs. Now, those are, this is for a brand new 3-bedroom, but, you know, there's components in there that have increased quite significantly and others not so much. But for example, the cost of labor would be factored into that. And we all know that that's gone through the roof if you can even find someone. So yeah, good time to review your insurance if you're a current homeowner.
Yeah, interesting. And I suppose also the detail that's provided there, I suppose they can design better, cheaper houses, don't have a staircase.
Well, modular homes are a little bit cheaper because they're built to, formulated. I suppose if you want anything that's bespoke, it's going to cost a lot more. Anything that's fancy.
Wow, 21% more. Okay, let's move on to small businesses. They can find it difficult to navigate whistleblowing legislation that's coming into force next month. Tell us about that.
Well, here's another piece of legislation that is really designed for larger firms, but being attached to smaller ones as well. And so smaller firms may not have a human resource office or facility. And that means that they're going to have to find a way to deal with complaints, whistleblower information that's provided confidentially. And what's it could be just wrongdoing about, say, someone stealing money from your boss or what have you. But it could be something more because there's been a change to include serious wrongdoing. And that could include bullying, sexual harassment, other kinds of issues that typically, arise in a workplace. As we know recently, there's certainly been some allegations, high-profile ones. And, if you have a human resource team in place to handle that, that's one thing. What if you don't? A lot of small businesses probably don't, but they're going to need to, or they're going to end up on the wrong side of the law. So this piece of legislation, it's called, let me see. It's got a different name now.
Yeah, what's
it's called the Protected Disclosures Act. Right. And that really says it all. Protected disclosures. So you're going to have something in place to allow people to make those types of disclosures. It's not going to be easy for some companies, especially those small ones with just a few staff, and maybe where the director is also the chief executive and also the dishwasher.
Starts to get very complicated.
Yeah, so that law comes into effect from the beginning of July, so time to review your policies and see how well you're going to be able to comply.
And Nona, what has the market been up to today?
Not too bad. We actually finished down 0.2%. And that's what we're seeing in Asia. Our market's falling. And, of course, still the story with the US dollar strengthening. So we finished down 0.2%, a 24-point drop to 11,350. The New Zealand dollar is relatively steady at 64.8 US cents, 90.5 Australian, and just a little bit stronger against the British pound at 51.9 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. It is 20 to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora anō, you're listening to Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Still to come, a Christchurch dog park gets the all clear after a poisoning scare, and we'll speak to one of the provinces that's given the Silver Lake deal the big tick. Ho mai o whakaaro. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme. 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ in the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. China is accusing New Zealand and the United States of distorting and smearing China's normal cooperation with Pacific Island countries. New Zealand and the US have issued a statement expressing concern about China establishing a military presence in the region. Auckland police are describing a drive-by shooting in Auckland last night as callous and reckless behaviour. A construction worker is lucky to be alive after his Manukau house was sprayed with bullets as he ate dinner. 3 councils claim the government's water reforms take away their assets without fair compensation. The Timaru, Waimakariri and Whangarei district councils are going to court to challenge the 3 water reforms, saying it removes democratic accountability. The Transport Minister, Michael Wood, says the public transport tender system has driven down wages and he wants a voluntary minimum pay agreement for bus drivers. The increased risk of COVID-19 has led to Dunedin Hospital being closed to all visitors from 6 o'clock tonight, but visiting is still allowed on compassionate grounds. NIWA says the next few months will be warmer and wetter than average, but meteorologist Ben Knoll says cold spells could prevent it from being the warmest winter on record. And holidaymakers heading away for the long Queen's Birthday weekend are being warned to drive carefully in the winter conditions. And let's check out traffic on that note. In Auckland, a crash is blocking lane 2 of the Harbour Bridge heading north. That's always fun, so expect delays. And on State Highway 20, one left lane remains blocked southbound after the Hillsborough Road off-ramp. There's currently an hour-long delay to travel the few kilometres between Maioro and Hillsborough Roads heading south. I'll update you with the latest news and weather at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho. Popular Christchurch parks reopened after an extensive investigation prompted by the death of a dog that got suddenly ill after visiting there. The owner of a 2.5-year-old lab posted on social media that her dog became sick after walking at the Groins Dog Park. She believes he ingested some form of poison. That prompted Christchurch City Council to take a closer look. Its head of parks, Andrew Rutledge, joins us now. Kia ora, Andrew. How confident can owners feel about taking their dogs back there?
Kia ora, Lisa. We feel they can be very confident. In fact, when we opened the dog park today, there were several people walking their dogs there, and many of them commented and thanked us for taking a very cautious approach to reopening the park. So that was really nice.
Okay, so tell us what you have done specifically to make sure that it's all clear there.
Sure. So when we found out about the post secondhand, and our head ranger took the immediate action to close the park, send in some staff to do a walkover and scan to see if there was anything obvious on the site that could have potentially caused harm to any dog. They didn't find anything visually at all. We then commissioned a series of tests working with ECAN and their team to test parts of the park. There's some areas in the park that get a bit muddy, but there's also water sources in the park, and that includes water that's stored for drinking bowls and so forth. And we were testing for any potential poison or toxin that could be harmful.
Do you mean natural or introduced, Andrew?
Both, natural and introduced, as well as toxins like cyanobacteria, like blue-green algae, etc. And all of the results have come back negative, so that gives us the confidence to reopen.
And what sort of cost was attached with checking all of this out?
I don't know the exact number. Sorry, it wasn't significant. It was in the few $100s per test, as opposed to really, really significant monies.
So a relatively small price for certainty, some would argue.
Absolutely.
The dog concerned, was there any autopsy done? Did you have an opportunity to speak to the vet or investigate that further?
Look, we have spoken to the vet. It was by chance, to be honest. We haven't had any direct contact. We haven't been able to have any direct contact with the persons directly affected, but we did, by chance, ring a local vet that we work with a lot, who mentioned that he was the vet that the member of the public brought their dog to. We rang that vet to get advice on how we might approach, or what we might be looking for, any advice he could give. We don't have results of any autopsy, sorry.
Was one done, do you know, Andrew?
I don't know, sorry.
Right.
I don't know if one was done. But we're certainly, we're going to try really hard to make contact with the person. And
did that vet give you any indication of what could be the possible cause of the death? Did they feel it was something in the park?
He didn't say that. I guess he was in a position where he couldn't categorically say yes or no. But look, yeah, it's probably best to talk to the vet around specifics, but he didn't give us any hints that there was anything in the park that he thought could have caused that tragedy. Yeah.
We're almost out of time, Andrew. Have you got a dog, and would you take it to that park?
I've got 2 dogs, and we've been to the groins many times, actually. Yeah, and one of them loves getting in the water. He's a golden retriever, so can't keep him out.
So you're going back. Okay. Appreciate your time, Andrew. That's Andrew Rutledge, who's the head of parks at the Christchurch City Council, and that park is now open after an extensive investigation. The release of a police progress report on bias in the force is being met with muted approval by justice advocates, but fears remain the whole exercise could come to nothing. The program was started in March last year. So far, there are no conclusions about whether bias exists or specific actions to tackle it. Hamish Cardwell has the story.
The program is being led by an independent panel, including long-term justice reform advocate Ta Kim Workman, among other high-profile members. But 15 months on, there are few concrete findings or definitive actions. Instead, lots of research into what's known about bias here and offshore. Emily Rakati from People Against Prisons Aotearoa says there is no doubt that bias exists.
The issue is that the police won't stop engaging in racist discrimination, and our fear as an organisation is that by commissioning reports and research and working groups and holding committees, that the police will put off actually making any of these meaningful changes.
Māori human rights lawyer Roimata Smale says it is time to push the accelerator.
I think it might be the time to be a bit braver. So it is a time in New Zealand to really confront the issue of bias.
The head of the independent panel, Ta Kim Workman, says he has no interest in producing just another report that goes nowhere. He says their work is unlike anything attempted before, and there is buy-in from the rank and file and top brass.
One of the major differences is that we're taking a kaupapa Māori approach. So it's being Māori-led. We'll be working moving as a collective, which is a very different model.
Police Commissioner Andrew Costa says the work is to establish a shared understanding of the evidence and to establish common ground.
Virtually every police service in the Western world is grappling with this issue, and a lot of the time what we see is people talking past each other in a way that doesn't reflect well on anyone, and without reaching agreement. So it's great to have a path forward that gives us some hope of achieving that.
Police documents released today show officers do not understand terms like systemic and structural racism, and that the use of the term racism is very polarising. Emily Rakate from Peoples Against Prison Aotearoa says this doesn't bode well.
What we have on one side is a creaking ancient organisation which engages in structural racist violent discrimination that takes lives every single year, which refuses to even use the word racism. And on the other hand, a group of really good people trying to tell them for the 100th time that they need to stop doing this.
Emily Rakate says the panel has no binding power, and she worries the whole exercise may achieve naught. Just Speak Executive Director Epiphany Ford Toa is content with the timeframe if it means real sustainable change. She says tackling bias needs to be broadened out.
We are keen to see a collective approach by the justice sector in addressing the issue of bias and racism and how these biases manifest in their respective organisations. And I refer specifically to the likes of corrections, Crown Law and the Ministry of Justice.
The program will now turn to looking at police decisions about who gets stopped and spoken to, when to charge and prosecute, and the use of force. Andrew Costa acknowledges these issues will be especially tough conversations to have.
It is 10 to 6, kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. New Zealand Rugby has finally managed to convert its Silver Lake deal from pipe dream to reality, meaning provincial unions are in line for a multi-million-dollar windfall. The proposal was approved with 89 votes for and just 1 against, and Silver Lake will invest $200 million in a new commercial entity that will control all of NZR's revenue-generating assets. MPC and Heartland unions get $20 million to divvy up between them. Joining us now is South Canterbury Rugby Chief Executive Craig Calder. Kia ora, Craig. I take it you voted for this?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, we definitely did. It took some time, 14 months in the making, but yes, we are one of the definite ones. I don't know who the one union that's cast that vote. I think it was $1 each way with them.
How do you think this deal is going to benefit provincial grassroots rugby?
Oh, look, there's no doubt about it. I think the big thing to stress here is it's not a silver bullet. What it is, it secures our future, and we can reinvest into the game, reinvest at club level, grassroots level, and every level of rugby. We've got some security around us now that we've got some revenue, we've got some. We know where our future's going. So before that, we didn't know. And that's what's really quite exciting for us at grassroots and community level. We know that our clubs can go out and spend.
Okay, Craig, how much are you getting in the very first instance? When will you have it by, and what are you going to spend it on?
So there's a whole lot of legal, obviously, paperwork to go through, and I'm picking that's probably 2 months. So the bigger unions, the NPC unions, they get $1 million. We get $500,000 straight away. And then it's also the New Zealand Deaf Union, they get some money, the referees get some money, and the Players Association get $5 million.
But your money, Craig, you must have already in your mind, given this has taken so long, have been calculated where it's going. So what are your thoughts?
No, our thoughts are we're going to put it into reserves and obviously think about the future. Particularly South Canterbury, we've got a stadium redevelopment, so we're a little different than other unions. We've got money earmarked to put back into the stadium for, to put a hybrid ground in, to put lights in. And I know several other unions are looking at putting, money in for lights. But the big thing, Lisa, is we've got a legacy fund. And in 2 to 3 years' time, clubs can be drawing on that legacy fund for various projects.
How do you get that money, Craig? The legacy fund, it's contestable, right?
Yes, it is. So the process is not in place yet, but there will be a advisory group that will sit there and take applications from the various clubs and various unions around New Zealand, and they'll process those applications for the projects they've got going. But I just want to stress that it's really important that the clubs are getting money out of this also. So 7 million of the fund, or nearly 8 million of the fund, is actually going straight to club rugby and into clubs.
There was a revenue cap for you guys, right? 17.5%, and you wanted the cap removed. It didn't happen, but you all still signed off. What made you think the deal was still worth it?
Because we negotiated long-term funding. We negotiated some increased funding on a yearly basis for us, and to be honest, New Zealand Rugby were very open to the negotiations, and it did take some while. And then I have to admit that a lot of it was held up over governance, and process.
So you don't get a seat on the board, as I understand it, of the new commercial entity, right? You just get a say over who would be selected for that seat, but you don't actually get a seat. So are you going to have any real influence or power over what happens?
That's a very good question. There's 2 seats that go to the unions. That has to go through an appointment process, so it's not self-appointed by New Zealand Rugby. So if we've got anyone that is good and we think should be put up, that goes through the appointment process. And that was a debating point.
So, Craig, this is a big deal. The genie's out of the bottle, right? You can't undo this. What if it doesn't work out?
There's no doubt it will work out. There's no question mark about it. This will work, and this will work for the benefit of New Zealand Rugby. And I get a little tired of some people saying we're selling the All Blacks. That's not right. We're selling the commercial rights to it so we can generate more money and bring it back into the game. That's really important. We've just been sitting on the potential revenue earner in the All Blacks and any black jersey.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts this evening, Craig. That's Craig Calder, who's the South Canterbury Rugby Chief Executive, and he voted for the Silver Lake deal. The UK is preparing for 4 days of celebration to mark the Queen's 70 years on the throne. A whole host of events are planned and local communities are throwing their own parties. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell reports.
The final preparations are almost complete for a celebration that's been 70 years in the making. In the pre-dawn gloom of a rather damp capital city, the Horse Guards and others have been tracing the route to be taken by Sunday's pageant. On Horse Guards Parade, the Foot Guards have been preparing for the event that will launch the Jubilee, the first full-scale Trooping the Colour for 3 years. And outside Buckingham Palace, a huge stage has been under construction for Saturday's BBC party at the Palace. It is the Platinum Jubilee, an opportunity to step back briefly from everyday pressures to show appreciation to a long-reigning monarch.
It's the story of all our lives, as well as the story of her life that we're celebrating. And I think particularly at the moment, with the way the world is, the way some people feel about politics in this country and around the world, the way people feel about Putin and what is happening in Ukraine, you look at the Queen and you see somebody who has been consistent, decent, dignified, and there, delivering the goods, delivering on her promises for 7 decades.
Quite how visible the Queen will be at this Jubilee is unclear. It's hoped she'll be able to appear on the palace balcony. Absent from the balcony will be the Sussexes, Harry and Meghan, and the Duke of York. This isn't the moment for reminders of family difficulties.
It has been difficult, this period, and I think hard on the Queen, really, to have these sort of family problems quite so much in the public limelight.
Some die-hard royalists are already camping along the Mall. However, their devotion is not universal. Not everyone across the country will find this celebration to their taste. Not everyone is a monarchist. But it is surely true that the overwhelming majority of people have deep respect for this monarch and her 70 years of service. In her Jubilee message, issued with a new photograph, the Queen says she hopes the next 4 days will give people a chance to reflect on what has been achieved over the past 70 years. The Jubilee programme will also be a chance for millions of people at different events across the country to say thank you for her 70 years of service.
And let's get to some of your feedback now. An absolute flood of it about the name of this country, whether it should be Aotearoa. This person says, I'm totally against our country being renamed Aotearoa. This is just nonsensical, and it is a racist attempt by our Māori friends, interesting choice of language, still reliving their past ancestors' battles with New Zealand Europeans of so long ago. The obsession of this renaming towns, streets and institutions with Māori identities is going from sublime to ridiculous, says Clive from Dunedin. Another person agrees no to changing the name of New Zealand. And on the other side of the coin, I sincerely believe New Zealand is a completely daft name for these beautiful motu of Aotearoa. Others agree to definitely change to Aotearoa as a name that has real historical meaning. A name given by a Dutch explorer has no bearing on our country, Liz reckons. Liz is from Wellington. Barney says, kia ora, we have a national anthem in 2 languages, so why not Aotearoa New Zealand or the other way around? Time to pay our respects to our original historical name rather than more recent European history. Aotearoa is a great name for this country, says another listener. Another person says, Aotearoa, boom, done. I'd be totally proud to live in Aotearoa. Such a meaningful decision.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko iwi Ashton tēnei. Police say it's incredibly fortunate they're not dealing with a homicide after a drive-by shooting in Auckland last night. A construction worker's lucky to be alive after bullets flew over his head as he sat in his manukau home. Police are calling it callous and reckless behaviour. There's been a spate of incidents in the city recently believed to be linked to gang violence. But the police haven't yet commented on whether last night's shooting is related. China has issued a severe reprimand after New Zealand and the United States issued a statement highlighting Beijing's influence on the Pacific. The joint communique was released after Jacinda Ardern's White House meeting and expresses concern about the establishment of China's military presence in the region. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson says the statement distorts and smears China's normal cooperation with Pacific Island countries. The Transport Minister wants a voluntary minimum pay agreement for bus drivers. Michael Wood says the current public transport tender system has led to a race to the bottom. He says the cheapest offer usually gets the contract, but most of bus operators' costs are wages.
One of the easiest ways that they've found to get contracts has been to lower their labour cost. And over a long period of time, that's led to an erosion of terms and conditions. And I'll just say, many of these companies, they want to do the right thing. They want to pay better terms and conditions to their drivers, but the whole system has been rigged against that.
Michael Wood says bus operators, unions and local government will work on establishing a wage baseline for drivers as well as looking at fair conditions. He says final decisions on the improved model will be made in a few months. The head of New Zealand Rugby says the country's provincial unions wanted clarity on several key areas before signing off on the Silver Lake deal. The deal with the US private equity firm will see $200 million invested into a new commercial entity that will control all revenue-generating assets of New Zealand Rugby. Mark Robinson says the provincial unions wanted reassurance on a few points, including ensuring a community rugby legacy fund is only used for the community game. New Zealand Rugby expects to have the money in about a month. TVNZ's head of news and current affairs, Paul Jurisic, has stepped down while an independent review gets underway into recruitment practices. And its chief executive has today apologised for initially saying breakfast co-host Kamal Santamaria was resigning due to a family emergency. Ruth Hill reports.
A TVNZ spokesperson says Paul Jurisic has decided to take leave during the period of the recruitment review. Before joining TVNZ last year, Mr Jurisic worked at the Al Jazeera network with Kamal Santamaria, who resigned from the breakfast show amid allegations of inappropriate behaviour at both broadcasters. In its own coverage, TVNZ is reporting that Chief Executive Simon Power has apologised for the initial statement, attributing Mr Santamaria's resignation to a family emergency, saying it was inappropriate.
3 councils are going to court over the government's controversial 3 water reforms. Under the plan, the management of storm waste and drinking water will be taken off councils and handed to 4 big regional entities. The government says that will mean the critical infrastructure will get badly needed upgrades and investment. But Timaru, Waimakariri and Whangarei district councils say the move takes away their assets without fair compensation and removes democratic accountability. The mayors are asking the High Court for declarations that uphold councils' property rights with independently assessed compensation if that property is removed. Dunedin Hospital has been closed to all visitors due to the strain of COVID-19 on the system. The Southern DHB says visiting is still allowed under compassionate grounds. Timothy Brown has more.
In a statement announcing the restrictions, the Southern DHB says the risk of COVID-19 is increasing and so is the pressure it's putting on the hospital's capacity. On Tuesday, 24 patients were in Dunedin Hospital with COVID, an increase of 50% from the same time last week. The DHB says it understands the decision to close wards to visitors will be distressing for patients and their families, but it's necessary to protect vulnerable patients. Visiting is still allowed under compassionate grounds, and patients to the emergency department and outpatients are still allowed 1 support person.
And Queenstown Airport has today welcomed back direct flights from the Gold Coast. A Jetstar flight arrived from the Queensland tourism hotspot shortly before 11:30 this morning. Direct flights from Sydney to Queenstown resumed last week. The airport's chief executive, Glenn Sowry, says he's thrilled to see Queenslanders returning to Queenstown again. Direct routes to Melbourne and Brisbane start again in 2 weeks. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, this year's Book Awards for children and young adults with former judge Steph Matuku. Can't judge this year because she's a finalist. Sarah Chamberlain talks cat containment, how to keep the moggy from making mayhem with the local wildlife, which will go nicely with Canterbury University Biodiversity Project Coordinator Emily Arthur. How to bring more of it into your neighbourhood on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday for all of the North Island except Gisborne to Wairarapa. Showers with squally thunderstorms and hail easing tomorrow afternoon. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers clearing late evening but developing again tomorrow morning with some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms from the afternoon. For Wairarapa, scattered showers, some heavy with thunderstorms on the ranges. Showers are easing and becoming confined to the coast tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy rain, possibly with thunderstorms and hail, easing tomorrow morning. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloudy periods, showers south of Dunedin, spreading everywhere this afternoon with some heavy falls. Tomorrow morning, showers easing and becoming confined to the coast. And for the Chatham Islands, rains developing late this evening, becoming heavy and thundery overnight, then easing tomorrow afternoon. The time is 6 minutes past 6. I'll update you with the latest news headlines at 6:30.
Ngā mihi iwi, no mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Bus drivers are being lured away by other bigger dollar jobs, both here and in Australia, leaving us hundreds short. About 1,400 bus services a day are being cancelled in Auckland due to driver shortages that are being made worse by COVID. All of this at a time when the government's offering cut-price public transport fares in a bid to get people out of their cars. It's earmarked $61 million to train and retain drivers. And earlier in the program, Transport Minister Michael Wood told Checkpoint he expects to make changes that will improve wages and conditions within 2 months. Bus and Coach Association CEO Ben McFadden reckons we're 500 drivers short across the country, and it will take at least a couple of years to rebuild those numbers. So who's poaching them?
Well, I don't think it's poaching necessarily. I mean, they're making the decision themselves to move to, other industries. And I mean, there are a lot of other industries out there who are very competitive now. So, we've had some obviously moving into the freight industry because they want to continue to drive because they love driving. There are others that have decided to retire. There are others that have decided to do something completely different, for example, like work in, Bunnings or something.
So when you talk about being, say, a freight driver, how does that compare pay-wise to driving a bus route?
Well, I mean, the freight industry itself has had problems, I believe, both recruiting and retaining staff because there just isn't the labour force generally in New Zealand at the moment, and they are electing to go into other roles. So, yes, the freight industry is paying, they can be paying quite a bit more than the bus industry. It is changing. I mean, the bus industry, we are trying to get, the wages up to be more competitive. But, equally, freight companies are finding it difficult as well. I mean, they're paying, total sort of, $35, even $40 an hour. Or if you move over to Australia, you can potentially earn, $150,000 or $200,000 a year.
So Australia is a pretty attractive option.
It could be, yeah. I mean, it really depends on the type of role over there. I mean, when I quote that $200,000, I mean, that's if you're driving across the Pilbara for, 5 days in a large, freight train truck, which, it's quite a different skill set. Some drivers have that licence, unless if they move into more sort of driving, rubber trucks or whatever in an urban environment in Australia, I mean, the pay is still better than here, but, I mean, it's not in that sort of $200,000 mark. But when you're also grappling with increasing living costs in New Zealand and inflation and so on, I mean, you wouldn't blame a lot of these drivers for making that decision.
Well, yeah. Well, when you're talking to people who tell you they're getting paid $23 an hour to drive a bus, and then we're looking at freight jobs that are maybe anywhere from $40 to $100 an hour, and then Australia's calling with some big contracts if you want to go into the mines, there's no competition really, is there, Ben?
No, not really. I mean, it really highlights the need that all of the government, local government, central government and operators all need to work together, and the unions to come up with a solution that can help solve the problem.
Just so that people understand this, who may not understand the skill involved here, how skillful is driving a bus, and where does this put you in the market?
Look, it's a highly skilled role. I mean, it's quite different from someone that's sitting in an office being, with a $1,000 laptop. I mean, these drivers are driving a $700,000 bus. They've got 40 plus passengers who they're responsible for their health and safety. They've had training and relationship management. They've got timing ability, they've got to understand their technology. It's a very, very skilled role, and I don't know about you, but parking a bus, very difficult, and I've seen some bus drivers that can park on a postage stamp. So, it is a skilled role, and that worries me a little bit that, people have sort of perceived it as a low-skilled job. It's not. It's a really high-skilled job with a lot of responsibility, and there is a great career path for drivers, in the industry, but it's getting them in.
So this $61 million that has been earmarked in the budget, where would you like to see that go?
Look, it's got to go to the places of greatest need, and I think at the moment it's really got to go towards a wage rise to help, combat the impact of the living cost rises that these people are facing. I mean, it's really hard out there. So, that's where I'd like to see the money go, yeah.
Pretty much into their back pockets?
As much as possible, yes.
Conditions. We understand that conditions are also a big barrier here. Split shifts and stand-downs of 4 hours at a time, some people tell us. I mean, how much of a barrier is that to getting people into the work?
Well, I mean, yes, it can be a barrier, and it is a barrier for some. I mean, others it suits their lifestyle. All I can say is that the operators, the councils and central government have been working together to try and minimise the number of split shifts. I mean, it's looking at schedules, and it's working in that partnership to try and find a way to reduce them so you don't have that burden on drivers. But in some instances, it's inevitable. And so what we need to do there is find a way to reward those drivers that end up having to do a split shift.
So people who work a split shift, right, do they get paid for the hours that are considered downtime in between driving the bus, or what is the reward or compensation?
Yeah, so at the moment, it varies. Some operators, out of the smaller ones, do maybe pay a small amount out of their own back pocket. It's not recognised through, any funding source. For others, the standard is that they don't. So that's why we've been trying to find ways to minimise the number of split shifts and the impact of the split shifts. But like I said, there are some that it suits their lifestyle. They will get up in the morning and they'll do their early morning shift, and then they'll, if they live locally, they might go home, they'll do a few things in the mid-afternoon and then go back and do the afternoon. And that's quite common in the school bus industry, for example. But it's a slightly different environment.
So, Ben, you mentioned some of the top dollar jobs you might be able to get in Australia, for example. But if you were driving a bus, public transport routes, say a comparable position, what do the Aussies get paid for that? Do you know?
I believe as a general they're paid better than over here. That's a very different arrangement over there, though. They've got a number of. It's a lot more complicated, I believe, and they do have lots of penalty rates and so on that they all consider. It's not a huge amount more than here, but it is more. Yes.
And that's Ben McFadden, who's the CEO of the Bus and Coach Association. And we've had a lot of feedback on the issue of this. We're about 500 bus drivers short and people are leaving, stressed out, underpaid and poor conditions, some of them say. Graham, an ex-bus driver, has got in touch. Totally destroyed the job by race to the bottom, he says, loving a truck driver's wage. Roger from Tauranga says, hey, a milk tanker driver starts on $39 an hour. Clearly milk is more important than people when it comes to bus drivers. Tanya says, my friend's dad was a bus driver in Tamaki Makaurau, and he was the one in the headlines that got beaten up twice for minimum or living wage. He's an ex-cop and a Vietnam veteran. And another person says councils have to take back the running of buses, etc. Letting a private company make profits from it is as a bad business model the local government seems to love. Also, a few of you getting in touch about the Rugby deal. This is the $200 million Silver Lake buy-in. The money-making parts of Rugby New Zealand being sectioned off. And this person says, perfect, followed by several exclamation marks. Rugby New Zealand can put $200 million into the Christchurch Stadium. And Terry says, thank God I will no longer have to support the All Blacks. And another person also thinks that this could be a good thing for the Christchurch Stadium. Perhaps the Rugby Union could use some of its newfound Silver Lake cash to build Christchurch a new stadium. Thanks for your feedback. New Zealand's Samoa peoples are celebrating 60 years since Samoa became an independent nation. The nation has marked Independence Day, the day for celebrating the country ceasing to be a colony of New Zealand. Whenau Fonua has the story.
Former All Black Tui Fa'asasina Sir Brian Williams is the first Samoan to receive a knighthood. He was a child at the time Samoa gained independence and remembers it as a joyous occasion.
I do remember that time. I would have been about 11 years old. It was obviously cause for great celebration, particularly after what had gone on, in the late 1920s and 30s with the Mao movement. So for all of us people, it means a lot.
Marking 60 years of independence coincides with Samoan Language Week. Students of Samoan heritage are celebrating their culture on campuses throughout New Zealand. At Auckland University, students are hosting dancing and music. They say the big day commemorates the independence struggle.
Today marks 60 years of Samoan independence when we gained freedom from colonial rule. We also commemorate the events of history where the Mao movement was established, and a lot of our ancestors were killed during this period of time.
It commemorates our ancestors as well as our grandparents. They've been brought up around the time when Samoa was not independent. They've come a long way for us to be where we are today.
Samoan Language Week, an annual part of the national curriculum, promotes culture and language. It's a far cry from the past, when New Zealand's relationship was marred by colonial oppression. 37-year-old Anai Laiavasa's parents migrated to New Zealand from Samoa. He's a doctor and the MP for Takanini.
Look, my own family was really involved in the whole, I guess we call it, the Mao movement or the struggle against the administration back then. But I see the legacy for us who now live in New Zealand. I carry that legacy with me, and in everything that I do, that I serve and I lead.
Tui Fa'asasina Sir Brian echoes the sentiments of Leavasa.
I was in a room on Saturday at the Rugby with Moana Pacifica, and so many people in the room had sort of achieved big things in the New Zealand community and society. You know, there were a number of parliamentarians, and you know, we have sort of broken through the glass ceiling.
Events in New Zealand marking 60 years since Samoa's independence are scheduled for the coming week, while in Samoa, they will continue celebrating for a year.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Australia's Foreign Minister is making a second trip in a week to the Pacific as China continues its multi-country blitz in the region. Penny Wong has arrived in Samoa and tomorrow she will travel to Tonga. China's Foreign Minister has just inked new deals with the island nations. The ABC's Stephanie Boris has more.
Tonga shut off from the rest of the world amid fears of COVID cases, but there's been a few exceptions to the rule. China's Foreign Minister touched down the other day and Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong arrives tomorrow.
2 visits in a week is pretty significant.
Tevita Motolalu is the editor of the Tongan Herald and he's a researcher at the Royal Oceania Institute, an independent think tank.
This is a very sensitive and trying times to be walking a tightrope relationship with a new partner like China in this region, but also maintaining our relationship with Australia and New Zealand.
Having just arrived home from Fiji, Penny Wong has now headed back to the Pacific. She arrived in Samoa early this morning and will visit Tonga tomorrow. Her visits follow in the footsteps of China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who's visiting 8 countries across the region.
This is a significant trip when taken in the context of China's current extraordinary tour of the Pacific.
Jessica Collins is a research fellow of the Pacific Islands program at the Lowy Institute.
Minister Wong would have done a trip to the Pacific pretty soon after being made the foreign minister because they have signified that they would step up their engagement in the region. But I think it was made so quickly into her term because of Foreign Minister Wang's trip.
Tevita Motolalu says the arrival of the Chinese delegation made an impression on locals. He insists Tonga still considers Australia a close friend, but
there's a lot of room for progress, for moving forward. Australia's willingness to assist the islands, and it's very much appreciated, but there's still a lot of development needs that needs to be taken care of.
In recent days, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi signed various bilateral agreements with different countries in the Pacific, promising support for disaster management and customs inspection equipment in Tonga, and discussing the pandemic, climate change, peace and security in Samoa. However, he failed to secure a trade and security agreement with 10 Pacific nations. Jessica Collins says that rejection is significant.
The Pacific Island nation leaders pushed back because there was also no collaboration on the regional agreement.
But China will keep pushing ahead, and in a sign there is some support for it, Solomon Islands issued a statement saying it values the proposed strategic partnership. Meanwhile, Australia's Foreign Minister will use her 2-day visit to reiterate the new government's plan to provide social and economic support to the region, saying the government understands that it must work with Pacific nations like never before. Penny Wong hopeful diplomacy yields dividends in mitigating China's influence in the region.
As Russian forces are getting closer to seizing control of a key city in eastern Ukraine, the US and Germany are sending more advanced weapons to help Ukrainian forces. The US is promising long-range rocket systems, while Germany is sending air defences and tracking radar. Russia has responded by accusing the US of adding fuel to the fire. The BBC's James Waterhouse has the latest.
Faces of anxiety. Wives and mothers of Ukrainian soldiers on the front line, brought together by a frustration of their lack of support.
I'm very worried. I know he's sitting in the trenches there. I know there are wounded and killed. I believe that if they receive proper weapons, they're real warriors and they will fight for the sovereignty of Ukraine, defend our country and get our seized territories back.
Olga's son was called up to fight 2 months ago. Today is his 41st birthday.
It is his birthday today, but I cannot even congratulate him and tell him that I love him and wait for him.
456 miles to the east, a reflection of Ukraine's loosening grip on the Luhansk region. Satellite images showing damage from shelling to Komoshevacha and Severodonetsk. Russian soldiers now appear to move through its streets and wander into this state security service building. They're thought to be Chechen fighters who have a reputation for being fierce. Almost all of the Luhansk region is in Moscow's control. Russia's gains are relatively small, but the cities they now occupy won't be easily retaken. And that is why Ukraine is asking for help to do more than simply be on the defensive. One wish has been granted by the US. Precision-guided missiles which can travel up to 45 miles with a condition.
The Ukrainians have given us assurances that they will not use these systems against targets on Russian territory. There is a strong trust bond between Ukraine and the United States, as well as with our allies and partners.
The Kremlin has described Kyiv's requests for weapons as a provocation to bring the West into this war. Ukraine has long seen them as crucial for its survival.
In the United States, a contamination scare has led to a crippling shortage of baby formula. That's left Australian dairy companies scrambling to export products to help out. American expats in Australia are also buying up supplies for desperate families back home. The ABC's John Daly has more.
Panicked families are struggling to find formula to feed their baby.
The FDA is looking at ways.
Brisbane mum and US expat Amelia Douglas is confronted by the headlines at home.
The dire shortage of infant formula across.
Her friends and family are getting desperate.
I've got a friend that has a special needs bub and needs particular formula, and they're having trouble. It's quite worrisome because it's the nutrition and livelihood for their children.
The crisis is worsening. US retail data shows out-of-stock rates for formula jumped to 70% nationally for the week ending May 22nd. That's compared to 45% the week before. When Amelia Douglas returns to the US for a visit in coming months, she'll be packing a few extra cans of formula to try and help.
I've just asked my friend group if anyone needs any additional formula. I'm happy to pack some additional formula.
The shortage is a result of bacterial contamination at a major manufacturer's production facility in Michigan, responsible for as much as 40% of US formula supply. It's reminiscent of the melamine contamination that undermined infant formula supply in China more than a decade ago. Then Chinese parents used personal shoppers in Australia, stripping shelves of supply. Elkie Pascoe is founder of the Australian infant formula manufacturer Little Oak, and she says those buying practices are happening again.
Yes, not on the same scale, mind you, not yet anyway, but we are certainly seeing, people inquiring and buying products for families, friends and families in America. We've seen our sales, we did sort of 5 weeks of sales in 4 days a few weeks ago.
Another Australian manufacturer, Bubs Australia, has been given the green light by US authorities to export 1.25 million tins of formula to the States, and the A2 Milk Company is trying to do the same under eased US import restrictions. But even infants aren't immune to the supply chain disruption being caused by the war in Ukraine. Ukraine is the world's largest producer and exporter of sunflower oil, which is actually a key additive to baby formula. As Russian forces hold Ukrainian ports hostage, Australian manufacturer Elkie Pascoe says prices for sunflower oil have quadrupled in recent weeks.
So in many cases, manufacturers will have to pass those costs on to Australian families. The longer term, risk is, of course, that there will be some potential stockouts.
Australian and New Zealand food authorities are allowing some manufacturers to substitute sunflower oil with other vegetable oils like canola oil. But Jan Kerry, CEO of the Infant Nutrition Council of Australia, is still worried about the future if the war in Ukraine continues to strangle supplies.
I don't want to be alarmist about this. We've got plenty of infant formula for our population now, but it is concerning. It could be concerning going into the future.
And let's get to some of your feedback before we head off. The bus drivers' pay. Tanya from Horowhenua says not just a wage rise, conditions need to change in regard to the bus drivers, and safety of drivers needs to be paramount as they're in charge of the vehicle and the people in it. Indeed, a skilled job, but they have to have a first aid certificate too. They deserve more. They're your family, says Tanya. A driver has got in touch to say, I'm a driver about to finish a shift that's booked 7 a.m. to 18:30 for 9.5 hours pay, and I'm on $23.50. Now, if you're using your fingers to count that up as I was, they've worked 11.5 hours, but they're only being paid for 9.5, probably a split shift that we have been talking about earlier in the program. On the park, the Groins in Christchurch dog park's being opened up again after extensive testing because of concerns a dog may have died as a result of being poisoned there. This listener says dog death, followed by multiple question marks. Closed a park on zero evidence, bar a social media post. Sad, irrational and a waste of money, they reckon. More shootings in Auckland overnight, drive-by shootings and potential arsons connected to gang tensions. They ask the question if you feel safe. This listener says, do we feel safe in a city? No, we don't. It feels no one is taking responsibility for public safety and the police are proving inefficient in keeping us safe. If instead of pushing their own agenda, politicians, regardless of their affiliated parties, worked together to help the community, surely we would get a better result, that person says. On the subject of changing the name of the country exclusively to Aotearoa, no change. We have spent a huge amount of time and money creating an international brand. Would Pepsi change their brand? Really? Comparing us to Pepsi? Clean Green New Zealand is known worldwide. This listener, a Dutch immigrant to New Zealand, says you might think that they would be attached to the name, but honestly, my whole family thinks it's ridiculous. New Zealand is named after a flat as a pancake province in a country we have no specific ties with. It's a non-identity. Switch over, but use both for a period of time to give the rest of the world time to adjust. It is a no-brainer, they reckon. That's about all we've got time for. Now, the late news team will keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything, check us out on Spotify, etc. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up speaks to Jack, the lumberjack Jordan, about how he cuts trees like they're chopsticks, just like he did to win the World Timber Sports Trophy. I feel I need to say, don't try that at home. Don't try it on your neighbour's trees. Don't do it to council trees either.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Auckland police say they could have been dealing with a homicide case after bullets were sprayed on a house in Manukau last night. China is criticising New Zealand and the United States for expressing concern about China establishing a military presence in the Pacific. The Hutt Valley District Health Board has voted against moving a maternity ward from its quake-prone building to a mothballed private facility. And Australia's new Labour government is promising Samoa it will take stronger action on climate change. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This morning on First Up, we learnt that Swedish families don't tend to feed visitors at dinner time.
In many families, the meals of the week are often decided days in advance. But having said that, as I said, children will be offered food if they were hungry, unable to go home, or if their parents were unable to make food for some reason.
And Giles from the business team wondered about a lost art.
Does anybody yodel anymore?
There must be, yes, there will be yodelers. I'll bet you there are.
The only song I remember was They Taught Me How to Yodel, which was that a John Paul Grinnell song?
Oh, crank it up then.
She taught me to yodel, yodel.
First Up, more welcoming than a Swedish family at dinner time. Listen anytime by downloading First Up the podcast or join us live weekday mornings from 5 here on RNZ National.
Kia ora Nathan, and I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. Don't think there'll be any yodeling on the show tonight. My first guest after the news at 7, although I'm rather partial to the odd bit of humming and singing. My first guest is Steph Matuku, who is an author. She's been a judge of the New Zealand Children's Book Awards in the past. She's not a judge this year because she's one of the finalists, and she's going to be talking about her book and the awards after 7. Then Emily Arthur is my second guest of the hour. She's a Canterbury University lecturer and biodiversity projects coordinator, talking about bringing more biodiversity into your neighbourhood. And in this half hour, well, later on, we've got our latest report on the inner workings of Parliament with Johnny Blades. First off, the detail. which is about a Chinese billionaire, Lin Lang, who began exporting thoroughbred horses out of New Zealand to China. Now, why has this lucrative business come to a halt?
Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, the Chinese billionaire dubbed Mr. Wolf, who pioneered exports of Kiwi thoroughbreds to Inner Mongolia.
We introduced you to Mr. Wolf. Now, he's the guy that chartered whole 777s to cart his horses around the world, and he blew everyone away at New Zealand's Thoroughbred Racing Awards with 4 big gongs.
He's made his fortune in fast food. Now he's spending plenty of it on fast horses. Kiwi horses.
That's not the only thing that put Lin Lang in the headlines. He was